A djinn is thought of as a wish granter, a lamp-dwelling helper that gives you your wildest dreams. But they're vile, feared for their ill temper and wrath, and known to manipulate humans with promises of wealth and power, promises of escape from the life they feel so trapped in as to seek the help of an unknown evil. The world is full of jinn now, wish granters, gurus, and experts, promising the world but only delivering on what benefits them just as much as you. Most of us can escape them or avoid them entirely, but what can be done when you're forced into their company, born in their grasp? What can be done when the illusion is all that you know? Red Dead Redemption 2 has one of the most memorable, well-written, and relatable protagonists in a video game to date. But as I played through Tuberculosis Simulator, I found myself relating with a different character too. One I found it to be painful and easy to relate to. Dutch van der Linde. The smooth-talking, charlatan leader of the van der Linde gang, a father figure to most of the outcast criminals bound together by a loose interpretation of a code and a hope for a better future with enough money and bullets. As I reached adulthood, I realized that despite my not entirely dealt with crippling fear of failure, people listened to me. I have a gift for encouraging speech, and I thought I could use that to make something really cool. Thought I was meant to be a leader of some sort, and that it was my gift because people naturally trusted me. I have failed at a startling number of things over the course of my life, but none so spectacularly as my first real attempt at leadership. I ran an entertainment company that in concept was remarkably similar to Entertainment 720 from Parks and Rec, but we, actually did stuff and didn't start with a ton of money. We also didn't make a ton of money. And I ran that company straight into the fucking ground. I poured thousands of personal funds into that sinking ship because my pride or fear wouldn't let me admit that at its core it was just kind of a poorly formed idea that tried to do too much with too little. It was an albatross, and that bird did not fly. When it came to the people that I needed to direct, that I needed to manage, I couldn't find the heart to criticize them or make proper judgments of their work when it really mattered. All I could see was me as a kid, waiting for another barrage of shame from someone who was supposed to lift me up. The same goes for criticism toward my own ideas. Every time I'd see an antagonist, someone else looking to tear down my ideas and tell me I wasn't good enough. Dutch gathered orphans and outcasts, people who bucked the march toward civilization that the world was trending in, or people young and inexperienced enough to be indoctrinated to that way of thinking. I found people who were freshly collegiate and scared of the concept of working a basic 9-to-5 for the rest of their lives, working in logistics or accounting or political science. I sold them the dream, a way to make money, maintain the independence of your time, and do something that you enjoyed doing. I believed that dream too. Shit, I have something fairly close to that now, but I was nowhere near achieving it then, and I did not lead any of those people to it. Leadership in any format is like parenthood, but you kind of have to thread the needle between both sides of the parental coin, father and mother, and despite our deviance from strict gender roles with same-sex and non-binary couples raising kids commonly now, I think the balance between more maternal energy and more paternal energy is still present even among couples of a more modern composition, sometimes even passing back and forth between parents or through the same parent. The motherhood component I understood. I had a wonderful example growing up. My mother loved me and supported me even when I was the worst, and to a degree, I think that's what motherhood is at its core. Acceptance of your baby, no matter what they become or how far they deviate from what you might have imagined for them. Again, to a degree, serial killer mothers aside. I also think motherhood is better defined than fatherhood. I know many examples of good mothers, but a relatively small number of good fathers. A decent number get parts right, my dad included, but get so many crucial elements of it wrong. And these things that they get wrong are so common that they're tropes. The angry father, the distant father, the controlling father, the father that is not there. Bad mothers are also definitely a thing, not a doubt, but bad fathers are bordering on the norm. And I think there's more reason for this than a lot of people consider, especially in the modern day. Up until recently, fatherhood was pretty universally associated with providing for one's family. This often meant significant amounts of time away from said family, unless you're like a farmer. Even in the days of hunter-gatherers, the men spent less time with the kids. You know, they'd be out hunting for many days at a time pretty regularly. I'd say the part where you actually interact with your child is the least defined part of fatherhood. To love, care for, and nurture the child, to empathize, teach kindness, and understand. These are pretty commonly associated with motherhood. What are the core tenets of fatherhood? Discipline, protection, to guide them in their transition to the real world, to push them but not to the point of breaking or resentment. All the same things as the mother, even? How many fathers do you know that get all of that right? Dutch took fatherless kids and gave them a more active father figure than many of them would have got if their biological father was alive. He gets to know them, compliments them, expresses his pride and love for them at regular intervals. Things deteriorate as the game continues. But Dutch gave all of these men, some of whom didn't join until their adulthood, a strong enough father figure, closed that gap for them solidly enough that they were still neck deep in their loyalty to him after he shot a young woman in the face in cold blood. The latter half of RDR2 and all of RDR1 make it easy to forget what he must have been early on. But Dutch was several things that most would consider admirable. Confident, intelligent, industrious, and cunning. Not racist, a real rarity in this time period, and perhaps most importantly, compassionate and understanding toward his chosen family. This isn't to say all of it is genuine, and this is one of the more interesting aspects of Dutch's character. A lot of debate is centered around how genuine he is regarding his feelings toward the crew and his belief system. A big part of the confusion revolves around Dutch's nature. Dutch is a bullshit artist with a quick trigger finger. There's nothing that I'm aware of to really suggest that Dutch is a prodigal talent in violence and gunslinging like some of his crew members. If this were an RPG, Dutch dumped every point into charisma and intelligence. And in pretty much every other way, he's just a dude. I can strongly relate to this. Physically, I am the pinnacle of averageness. I'm not ultra strong or super weak. I'm not super fast or slow. I am 5'9", 175 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. But I can make you feel like you're 6'5", or something cooler than that if you're already 6'5". I understand Dutch's methods, the necessary mojo needed to point people in a direction and make them believe that it's their idea and their objective just as much as it is mine. While there's no way to know for sure, comparing my own character with Dutch, I can assume that there'd be other similarities. I know from my early childhood that the reason I could convince people of things so easily is that I could convince myself just as easily. And it wasn't my logic, but my conviction that sold people. I also know that I could convince myself up until the point that I was shown or proven otherwise. And once the spell wore off me, it was gone for everybody else too. I believe that's what we're seeing in Red Dead 2. It's a very slow version of that. Dutch has faith. Dutch has a plan. Until he doesn't. Then all he's relying on is knee-jerk reactions and the loyalty of a bunch of hardened criminals. And ironically, the most loyal and hardworking of his crew is the one he seems to value the least, because he views Arthur as a given. A relatively common phenomena among parents as well. The most well-adjusted child that requires the least direction and correction receives the least attention. Parents make a wide variety of mistakes. When you think about it, the expectation is kind of insane. It's kids raising kids. I'm not even 30 yet, but I feel like most of my friends that are going to have kids already have them. 20-somethings that have, at best, barely figured out how to function as an adult are now expected to teach it to a blank slate of a human being. I know on-the-job training is generally the best way to improve, but surgery, like parenting, has lifelong or life-ending implications if done wrong. Can you imagine if surgeons were trained this way? He needs a quad bypass, good luck. This is a lot to do with what the phrase, "it takes a village," was coined from. It's an acknowledgement that most parents need help because who the hell knows what they're doing at that age? Even RDR2, Dutch had Hosea, even Uncle, as seen in late RDR2 and RDR1, Susan Grimshaw to help with the upbringing of his chosen sons. But in many places in the world, the village just isn't around anymore. We have our immediate family circle, and unfortunately, everybody outside of it is increasingly viewed as a threat. Even the public school system, one of the last remnants of such a world, is trending toward a chaotic and uncertain place, where parents are side-eyeing teachers in fear that they're the next predator on the news, and side-eyeing the other students in fear that they're the next shooter. The last days of the company I ran were really similar to the last days of the gang in RDR2, minus the persistent coughing and red eyes. One of the things that stands out about this section is the side arguments happening that Arthur isn't privy to. It leaves this sense of unease where everyone is at each other's throats for reasons outside of the obvious. Constant tension. A looming black cloud. Everyone has an idea of what's coming, and we're all just waiting on the fall. I remember understanding my father a lot more during that time. My father had major anger issues. No direct physical abuse, but he'd scream and break my stuff and say horrible things to me and my mother. When I turned 15 and hit puberty, I'd had enough and started trying to convince my mother to divorce and leave him. A horrible prospect, but I'd watch my mother numb herself with antidepressants for years while we lived, walking on eggshells next to a bomb with indeterminate triggers. One day we left, and while those years after were financially very stressful, those years also taught me who I really was. And I had to do a lot of the self-exploration that a lot of kids do when they're actually kids, as a teenager working jobs to keep the lights on. Problem aside, I remember those years fondly. My dad and I have some degree of a relationship today, but there's always been a limit to how much I can take him seriously when it's very obvious he still considers himself the victim in this scenario. It's amazing what the mind can choose not to see. I knew that company wasn't going to make it for months prior to when I actually told everyone. I couldn't accept that I'd failed those people to that degree. Couldn't confront the fact that maybe a 19-year-old trying his hand at being a CEO for a multi-member organization of other 19 and 20-year-olds wasn't a good idea. I could see everything falling down like I'd already lived it, but I was in this fugue state of denial while simultaneously prepping to make things easier for when it inevitably happened, literally making side hustles and other shit to make money instead of trying to fix it, while telling everyone things were fine and going about business as usual. I just sat there, watching the dominoes fall. I wonder how long my dad saw what was coming before it actually happened. Decisions like that don't come overnight. I wonder if he knew every yell and curse was another tally on a private countdown my mother had to leaving. I'd lie awake at night that last month of the company's existence, not thinking about fixing it, but about what I'd do after, like it was already done, even though jobs were still being worked. Then one day I checked the company account and it was empty. And if I put anything personal into it, I wouldn't be able to pay rent. It was over. The U-Haul was in the driveway. The Pinkertons were in the camp. Dutch, at his core, is a dreamer. The simplest way to describe his arc is he thought he could do something and he couldn't. He thought he could buck the system, make a better life for himself and people that he cared about. make the world bend to him instead of bending to the world. We don't really know our parents. We know them in relation to ourselves. They seem almost static. And stability being one of the most important aspects of childhood development, this seems to be how it should be. But it also makes it easy to misunderstand them when you're not acknowledging their inherently flawed nature, the same nature you possess. My grandparents on my dad's side were cruel, frequently humiliating and beating their children, my dad no exception. We're all the children that we once were, as well as the adults we become. And this means you never outgrow the traumas that child went through. You just have to recognize what they turn you toward and steer the other way. I still hear the voice of my dad criticizing what I do, screaming when I fail. When I first began to fight it, I screamed right back. I rebelled. I wouldn't be fearful and weak because of the complex he'd given me. I wouldn't let him keep me from what I was worth. But when I escaped him, I didn't stop fighting. I was screaming at myself, my dog, my girlfriend at the time. I didn't even realize when the target had shifted, and I was just lashing out at whatever felt like my dad that day. Even if they didn't mean anything by it, or the criticism was completely valid, it was just a feeling triggering a reaction. An embedded pattern that I'd developed as a defense mechanism that was destroying me. Dutch's dad died in the Revolutionary War fighting for the Union when Dutch was around 6. He developed a deep hatred for the Confederates in the South, their ignorance and cruelty. He hated the system that played a part in a war that took his father away and left his mother starving and destitute. You can tell from the personality that developed he had to become his own father figure. The most common mark of charisma is the ability to direct oneself so well that others want to be directed by you. He had appeal in rebellion, in his ability to rob his way to moderate wealth in a world where starving was commonplace. He did this under the guise of freedom and liberties, constantly on the run, worried about a bullet that could come from anywhere. The furthest he could ever be from free, hiding in shadows, raising the stakes to escape his own actions, running from the law, his rivals, the ones he wronged, shooting his way out of danger and back into it, trapped in a loop, a maelstrom that dragged in everyone he ever loved.
I gave you all I had. I did. Come on.
This is a man losing himself. Unable to speak the apology written all over his face because it's laughable, in the throes of this hell of his own making. Damned by his most loyal son, the only remaining member of the foundation of his family left with the perfect representation of his shadow. A morally bankrupt, lawless taker who'd stab his own mother for a big payday. Around the same time the company failed, that girlfriend left me. And while there was certainly more than just my behavior going into that breakup, I certainly didn't blame her. And frankly, that turned out to be the best thing for both of us. If that happened, I wouldn't have met my wife, wouldn't have done any of the other stuff I've done. But at the time, I found myself alone, broke, and without prospects. And I cried not for the money or for that woman, but because in pursuit of escaping my dad, I'd become him. I was alone, and I'd pushed away everyone that cared about me, just like he had. You either deal with your pain, or it deals with you. Dutch only retreated further from his mistakes. By far one of the most soul-crushing reveals of this game is that by the end of the primary campaign, the gang apparently possessed something like $40,000 in a secret stash outside of camp. That's like 1.5 million in today's money. So now the question is, why weren't the gang sipping Mai Tais in Tahiti at this point? That kind of money in that time period could have done just about anything. They could have been paying people off, buying rural land, buying an entire township, realistically. A boat would have been light in terms of what they could have afforded. And the real answer is that they were never going to Tahiti, and Dutch never planned to escape. He already had what he wanted. This game was never about Dutch trying to realize his dream. This is about the dream's decline. Dutch had posed himself as the outlaw messiah, but the veneer cracked. Arthur was like his surrogate father in many ways. He killed, he lied, he stole, all in the name of personal freedom, an ideal that he imagined he upheld by taking it away from many. Some deserving, some innocent. People listened to him, many members of the gang seeing him as the general and Dutch the commander. Arthur, however, began to see the hollowness in their ideology in the end. He saw the writing on the wall that the end was nigh for people like themselves, and tried to get whoever he could away from the fallout of Dutch's direction. He saw forgiveness, redemption. I don't know if my dad will ever accept his part in the downtrend of his own life. He still lives in the same house I grew up in, a ghost living in a pile of memories. No friends, no partner, no accountability. Whether or not the way I behave is a direct result of his treatment, I'm still accountable for my behavior. I still have to atone for what he contributed to who I am. I still have to seek my own redemption, regardless of how frustrating it might be that he won't seek his own. You will fail. You'll fail your friends, and your friends will fail you. You will fail your children, and your children will fail. But failures don't have to be hereditary. The best you can hope for is that your children will fail in ways completely unique to you. And when it happens, you're there to tell them that they may have failed, but they are not failures. Redemption is always a choice. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, as always. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help me grow this growing channel, actually. By the time this has come out, we'll probably have hit 300. I would imagine we're really close right now. And thank you guys so much for all the support on this. It's a lot more than I've expected. And it's really humbling to see how much people have enjoyed some of what I've put out. As far as this goes, tell me about your deadbeat dads. No, I'm kidding. Tell me about your experiences with failure. How your failures may have been influenced by the failures of your parents, or what it's like to be a dad if you fall into that category. This subject has been... I've wanted to do this subject for Red Dead Redemption 2 since I started this channel. So this is a very loaded topic for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of you as well. Parental issues run deep. But until next time, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and don't you dare go hollow.